Once upon a time, in a far-off land called Tierra, in a cottage deep inside the enchanted forest, there lived a little green gnome. Now, although the little green gnome lived alone in the cottage, he had more friends in the forest than you could possibly count. All the birds in the trees and every single animal that dwelt there would often stop by for a cup of tea or some lemonade and have a friendly chat. Even Gus, the grumpy gorilla, would occasionally trundle by to complain about this year's bananas or to moan about this and that. Secretly, however, he would look forward to his visits, although he would never admit that to the others. If any of the animals were sick, they would come to the cottage. There, the little green gnome would make some rather special medicine from his garden of herbs and spices. Sometimes they smelled most peculiar, and they didn't always taste so nice, but they always worked. This particular forest, being enchanted and therefore very magical, was quite a sight to see and fascinating to listen to when the trees sang and whistled in the wind. However, because it was an enchanted forest, no mortal man was permitted to venture into it, this being the magical law of the land. Many stories were told of those who had tried and been frightened away. So it was on a quiet and peaceful Saturday afternoon, everything slowed to a standstill. All became deathly still at the sound of the approaching Prince Vishin Fasti's private army returning home from the wars. They had been soldiering far and wide throughout the lands, waging wars and collecting taxes. Even though the prince was very handsome, all the people, including his own soldiers, were very much afraid of him. The only voice that could clearly be heard above the creak of saddles and the chinking of swords on shields was the rather silly songs of praise from the skinny minstrel jester. As he danced and cartwheeled before the prince, he croaked,
"The fearless prince has won the day, the handsome prince is on his way. He's taxed the rest and left them lame. Now we're on our way home again to Tierra City."
So it went on until they reached a fork in the road with a sign pointing in one direction and reading, "To the city of Tierra," and another sign reading, "From the enchanted forest. None may enter."
"What's this?"
cried the prince, pulling up his stallion sharply and silencing the jester with a backhanded cuff.
"Who dares to deny Prince Vishin Fasti the right of entry into any abode or lair?"
He rose and turned in his saddle, casting a dark glance on the column of horsemen and foot soldiers who looked back with watchful, wary eyes.
"Armory,"
spoke the minstrel.
"It is known that all the mortal men have never entered the forest, for it is deeply enchanted with gremlins and goblins."
"Silence, you jesting jackal!"
roared the prince, wheeling his horse around to the captain of the guard.
"What of this place then, Captain? Could be some handsome taxes to be gained, don't you think?"
Well, sire,
replied the captain,
"'tis said to be folly to enter this place as mortal men for fear of—"
"Fear?"
roared the prince.
"Did you say fear, Captain? Well, all should know that my armies and I are fearless."
"Oh, beg pardon, sire,
answered the captain, looking to his men for support.
but be wary of the unknown."
"Then know me to be fearless, Captain, for it is into these very scraggy woods we will go, and any man flinching I will have put to the sword. Now forward!"
So the column slowly turned into the path leading to the menacing, silent, and watchful enchanted forest. The prince, riding in the lead, was mumbling to himself about old women being frightened of matchwood, when suddenly the air around them turned very cold. A strange noise seemed to be coming from deep within the forest. It grew louder and louder until it escaped from the trees as an icy wind, which whispered, "Shh," and was gone. The column stopped, and the men, wide-eyed and whispering, shot glances at the trees around and above them. The trees seemed to be waiting for something.
"Onward, men,"
commanded the prince.
"and you, minstrel, croak one of your silly songs for good cheer."
Indeed, it was a croak as the minstrel nervously shuffled on ahead, not wishing to go too close to anything. On they went, many men drawing their swords as they felt the glances of angry, watchful eyes. Deeper and deeper into the forest they followed the prince and the shuffling minstrel. All at once, a low-hanging branch from a strange tree grabbed the minstrel's foot and shot him high into the air, where he hung upside down, shrieking wildly at the tree. This made the prince laugh aloud, and he ordered that the poor jester be left until he learned to sing. The minstrel, however, bit through the thin branch that held him and dropped into the column of men, grateful for their protection. At last they came to the clearing which surrounded the cottage. There sat the little green gnome at his garden table with a pot of tea. His strange shape, pointed eyes of bright green, and long hooked nose were all the prince could see at first. The gnome lifted his head and said,
Hello.
The dark eyes glittered with amusement underneath a shock of brown curly hair, and his movements were short and quick as he chirped.
You are not supposed to be here, you know. But since you are, would you like a cup of tea?
Look at that, whispered the captain to a nearby soldier. He has a blue tongue and green skin. The prince glared down from his horse at the gnome and declared,
I have come all this way to collect taxes, and it seems that you have none, and you insult me with your appearance, you ugly gnome. Seize him!
The gnome gave a frightened squeak and attempted to run for shelter of the forest, but the huge soldiers quickly overtook him and bound him with rope.
Tie him across one of the mules, and we will head for home,
shouted the prince. As he did so, there was a tremendous clap of thunder, followed by a series of lightning bolts, which made the horses dash away from the clearing.
Charge for the city!
The column galloped away as the sudden rain lashed at them. The howling wind and the forest storm began to screech and rage. But the horses and soldiers were big and strong, and the efforts of the forest to stop them were in vain. Soon they were away from the woods and out into the meadow, leaving the dwindling storm behind them. That night, after a hard ride across the plain and through the mountain pass, they arrived at the city to the cheers of the townsfolk. A magnificent feast was made ready in the town square, and the little green gnome was put into a cage for people to laugh and to poke sticks at. The light from a fire reflected in his sad face as he stared at the bottom of the cage, mournfully wondering who would tend his garden and look after his animal friends. The light from another fire, far away in the clearing of the enchanted forest, was reflected in the worried eyes of the animals, who were holding a meeting to decide what should be done. Gus the gorilla was complaining to them all.
Oh, we shouldn't have attacked them when we had the chance.
The rabbits replied,
We had no chance to do anything because we were too small.
and so it continued, with arguing and disagreeing until the wise old owl silenced them with a that was so loud it left him quite breathless.
No, it is not what we should have done. It is what we should do now.
Well, what do you suggest?
Demanded a badger.
We will ask Eric the Eagle because he always knows.
Very nice of you to say so.
Boomed a deep voice from the top of a nearby tree. With a clatter of wings, he swooped down amongst them, sending sparks flying from the fire in all directions, singeing Gussie's fur, which started his complaining once more.
Silence, all of you. I have a plan.
Meanwhile, in the city of Fera Tierra, the feast was coming to an end. 2 soldiers had been sent to take the little gnome down into the dungeon, where he sat mournfully on some straw in the corner of his cell. Occasionally the guard would walk past and make some remark or joke, but he didn't seem to hear. Across the cell in another corner, two little yellow eyes looked out from a small hole in the stone wall, then disappeared again. It was Robbie the Rat with his band of scoundrels who lived in the city walls and had the largest collection of stolen jewellery and valuables that anyone had ever seen.
Now that is strange.
He puffed through his huge cigar.
I recognise that old gnome from when I was a kid, before I left the magic forest. He would never harm anyone, and yet they have thrown him in the dungeon. I bet you it's that oaf of a prince's doing.
He fumed.
Well, tonight I'll teach him another lesson.
Robbie! Robbie!
Came an anxious cry from behind the window.
Robbie! Let me in! Let me in!
It came again.
Now, how many times do I have to tell you lot to use the password?
He mumbled through his cigar.
You never listen to the best thief, so you never learn, seems like.
There's gold, Robbie! Big pieces of
Gold?
Ouch!
Gold? Gold, did you say?
Inquired Robbie, who had his fellow villain rat by the neck and halfway through the window.
Where would that be now?
On the castle battlements. Big pieces, just shining in the moonlight. All on their own.
Quickly and quietly the two rats made their way through the undercity and up to the castle top, with Robbie explaining all the way why they should keep it a secret from the rest of the rat pack.
Ooh!
Whistled Robbie from his hole in the wall.
Now isn't that the biggest, most beautiful?
But he was lost for words as the moonlight twinkled on a huge chunk of gold. He quickly looked about for a sentry, and seeing nobody and nothing in sight, beamed a smile and sauntered over to the gold.
Well, well.
He grinned.
Good night's work, eh?
He picked it up, flicking his cigar ash on the spot. All too late, Robbie tried to run as the thunderous clatter of wings was heard above his head, and the strong grip of eagle's talons took him soaring up into the night sky.
Don't try to bite me, Robert, old boy, or I might just drop you.
Boomed the voice of Eric the eagle.
Bite?
Exclaimed the rat.
Why, Eric, you know I love night flying. But next time, how about asking me first?
They hovered high above the castle walls while Eric made the suggestion.
You see, my friend Rat, you must bring the gnome out into the square, and then you can have the gold.
Just one or two conditions.
Began Robbie, but decided they were not so important after a short fall, which, of course, Eric was very sorry about.
Shake on it, then,
said Robbie when they had landed. But as Eric raised his talon, Robbie shot underneath him, tearing a feather from his tail. Disappearing into the hole, he called back.
Thanks. I needed a pen.
He poked his grinning face back out of the hole and said,
Okay, it's a deal.
And was gone. Late into the night, the rat pack drew their plans on how to rescue the little green gnome. At last, when the entire city was sleeping, they silently made their move. The guard, with his dungeon keys hanging from his pocket, was seated just outside the cell and snored loudly as Robbie and the other two rats squeezed their way over to the hole and tiptoed over to the gnome.
Psst! Hey, Gnome, old mate.
Whispered Robbie as the dark eyes flickered open in surprise.
Don't make a sound. We're going to get you out of here. Now, shh.
3 of the rats were climbing onto each other's shoulders in order to steal the keys from the guard's pocket when the rat at the bottom began laughing.
Keep still. Stop that.
Here's the smallest rat at the top, who had just about grabbed the keys.
I can't.
Chuckled the supporting rat.
He's wearing big socks.
With that, he giggled again, making them all fall down with a frightful clatter and leaving the smallest hanging from the guard's pocket on the end of the keys. The guard awoke with a start and with a yell knocked the rat from his pocket, sending the keys sliding across the stone floor and into the waiting hands of Robbie.
Alarm! Alarm! It's those thieving rats again!
Called the guard. But as he drew his sword, the largest rat of them all sank his huge teeth into his ankle, making him scream out for help. Robbie had the keys in the lock and swung with all his might. The lock would not budge, and they could hear the guards charging down the stairs towards him.
Grab his tail!
Yelled the fat rat, whereupon they all swung from tail to tail, with Robbie shouting at everything in sight. Just as the guards plunged around the corner, the lock clicked open, spilling the rats in an untidy heap.
Let's get 'em, boys!
Shrieked Robbie, and with an angry snarl the rats leapt across the floor, attacking the bewildered guards. There ensued the most ferocious battle, with swords swinging and rats biting. Robbie dashed back for the gnome and said,
Follow me, quickly!
They ran between the legs of the fighting soldiers, up the stairs and out into the courtyard.
The town square!
Said Robbie.
We must get to the town square!
They raced across the courtyard to the square, with the soldiers hard on their heels. On reaching the centre, they turned to face their foes, who, with wicked smiles on their faces, began to advance slowly and spread out to surround the pair.
It's the rat I want first, me boys,
Uttered the leading soldier.
He stole me gold medal, he did, so he did. Let's scat him.
As they made a rush forward, however, a huge shadow covered the light of the moon. With a sudden flash of beak and talons and the thunder of wings, the soldiers lay strewn about the square.
Nice going, Feathers!
Congratulated Robbie.
Now where's me reward?
The eagle had taken hold of the gnome and was slowly rising into the sky when he called back down.
It's where you first saw it, Ratbag. Best be quick, though, because there are a lot of thieves in this place.
The last of what he had said was not heard, for Robbie the rat had disappeared in a blur of dark fur. Slowly and gently the eagle flew way up above the city walls and out of reach of the archers' arrows, which were falling back to earth. He gracefully soared aloft among the stars with a very tired but happy green gnome. He dipped one huge wing, banked around to the right, leading away over the mounting pass. Far, far below, his huge shadow made patterns over the mountain peaks, where the fireflies flashed their signals across the plain to the forest, saying, Plan accomplished, all is well. Plan accomplished, all is well. When they eventually began their descent into the enchanted forest, after a long, high flight, they could see the flicker of the fire and hear the voices of the animals as they sang and danced at the welcome home party. It was said on that night that even Gus stomped around a bit, but the others made him sit back down because he kept treading on everyone else's toes. The next morning, Prince Fishing Fasty had the guards lined up before him in the palace. He raved and shouted until he was so red in the face that he had to sit down.
You fools!
He hissed.
My army made to look ridiculous by a bunch of jumped-up mice and a little green gnome.
Robbie the rat, who at that moment was in his council chambers underneath the floorboards, laughing and listening to every word above him, then glared up, saying,
Bunch of jumped-up mice, indeed.
And went back to counting his money. The entire city was called to the town square, where the prince addressed them from a large wooden platform, saying,
Soon I am to be your king, and to show you what a brave king I will be, I shall go and recapture my prisoner single-handed.
A few people at the front of the crowd gave a weak cheer, while others whispered to each other,
He's crazy. He's nuts.
Calling for his horse, he brandished his sword and cried,
This time I shall bring back his head.
And with that charged off out through the city gates in the direction of the mountain pass. All that morning he galloped until his horse foamed from the mouth and was wet with sweat. Finally reached the outskirts of the forest, but his horse was afraid and would not enter. As he tried again to swing it into the trees, the horse pucked him high into the air and ran away. He cursed and swore, but all he saw was his trusty stallion disappearing into the distance. Grumbling, he began to walk into the forest, but stopped and looking up, exclaimed,
That's strange. It seems much bigger than before.
He set off again, even more determined. The going was soon becoming very difficult, and the prince bashed his shin on a tree root, which he then cursed and kicked. No sooner had he done so than a long branch came swooping down and swiped him across the backside with such force it sent him 6 paces forward into a prickly thorn bush. Growling, grumbling, and very sore indeed, he began to move cautiously deeper into the forest. He continually imagined that something was laughing and chuckling at him. All at once he saw the face of the gnome and charged, swinging his sword right into an angry swarm of bees which chased and stung him all the way into the river. When he surfaced, It seemed again that everything around him was indeed much bigger than before, which he found most confusing. Still, on and on he pressed, but with increasing difficulty, until in a crazed voice he yelled,
I am coming to get you, Gnome!
To his amazement, his voice sounded almost like a little girl's in his own ears. Then came the reply,
Well, here I am, if you really want me still. Over here behind this tree.
The prince looked up at the tree from where the voice had come. It was enormous, so high, in fact, that it was impossible to see the top. He then hauled himself over the huge tree trunk, fell down the other side, and was confounded by what he saw. It was the clearing where the gnome's cottage stood, but everything had grown so large that the prince could simply not believe his eyes. Staring across a lawn, which was as big as a football field, the baffled prince saw that even the gnome now seemed huge and frightening.
You've tricked me with your devilry.
He cried from the corner of the garden.
You've tricked me, and that's unfair.
He squeaked.
Oh no,
Smiled the gnome across the lawn to the trembling figure of the prince.
you have only yourself to blame for this, because it is not the forest or I that have grown, it is yourself who has shrunk to as small as you are worth. And as you can now see, that doesn't appear to be very much, does it?
The little green gnome then stood up and walked over to the terrified tiny prince, saying,
You were warned not to enter the enchanted forest, but you would not listen. So now you are paying the price of being what you really are.
No,
shrieked the tiny stricken figure.
you cheated and tricked me.
So saying, he saw what looked to be a giant mouse looking at him with hungry eyes. With a frightened yelp, he was over the tree limb and gone, rushing through the undergrowth, screeching,
You tricked me.
again
You cheated and tricked me.
and again.
You tricked me.
No one has ever seen the Prince Fishy and Fasty from that moment to this very day, but some say they have heard a shrill cry from within the woods from time to time. Perhaps that was just the twittering of some tiny birds or insects, but then again, I wonder, was it, do you think?
Thank you.